and welcome to Falls from Iron. Just to do a little bit of housekeeping, as I always do, please don't forget to like, comment on and share the stream to your social media platforms. Subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't done so already, and make sure you hit the bell icon for alerts on new content. And as always, guys, we thank you very much indeed for your support in this matter. We are here for the latest instalment of Mount Matty Rushmore. Just to give you a quick overview of how this runs for those of you that might be wondering what this is all about. Basically, out of the goodness of our heart here at Falls from Iron, we will donate to our guests the side of a mountain. So it's kind of like Mount Rushmore. You have 4 heads of the US presidents on the side of that carved into it. Well, our guest is going to carve out 4 heads of West Ham players that they have seen during their time following the club. Now, they may or may not be the best, most skilled players. They may choose to focus on something like cult heroes, for example, as opposed to legends. They may choose academy graduates. They may choose bad boys. They might even choose someone on the basis that they like them as a person, or any combination of these genres and much, much more besides. It's their mountain. They can decorate it as they see fit. And today, taking up the challenge, we have Mr. Robert Banks. How are you, sir?
Good evening. Very well, thank you. Thanks for the invite.
No, you're more than welcome. I'm glad you could come on. How's things been your end? All good?
Yeah, busy with the John Lawyer's videos, which we were briefly discussing before we came on air. Obviously, they're quite time consuming, but I'm sort of 6 weeks ahead. So I've got a bit of slack built into the system at the moment, and
good.
It's just as well because it's getting very congested at the moment. The number of games and whatever. So yeah, it's good fun though. Enjoying it.
Good. How many episodes is that now that you've got out? Was it 28, 29?
It's episode 29 is out on Saturday.
Yep.
That's part 3 of the 80-81 season. Which is in 6 parts because there were like 61 games that season. So if you can get your head around that, and it was pretty much the same 11 every week.
Yeah.
I just started work on 81-82, which is a bit more relaxed because we got knocked out of both cups quite early on.
That was the first season back in the first division, wasn't it? After promotion.
That's right. Yeah. I think we still went. It's an amazing statistic, and trying to get your head around it now. We went unbeaten from Boxing Day 1980 in the league. This is unbeaten from Boxing Day 1980 to the end of October 1981. Which was 27 games, I think, 27 league matches unbeaten. It's got to be a club. It's got to be a club record. I haven't checked going back further than the sort of mid 70s, but I don't think we'll see the likes of that again.
No, sadly not. We'd be quite happy. I'd be quite happy with sort of like maybe the next 3 matches that West Ham play. If we can get 3 wins, that'd be something.
Let's walk before we can run.
Exactly. Absolutely. Right. So, Mr. Banks, are you ready to get your hammer and your chisel?
I was thinking of doing it with a cocktail stick, if that's all right, because I like to do these things, take time.
Hardcore. Well, okay, with your cocktail stick, you've got the side of your mountain and you are going to decorate it as you see fit. So, without further ado, who is the first head that you are going to carve out of your mountainside?
Okay. Well, you mentioned that there were some rules here, and the first rule was that I had to have seen them play in the flesh. So obviously that ruled out quite a number of sort of the legendary. I started going in '83. So, but the theme I picked is natural goal scorers. And at the head of that queue, I think from the early 80s to the mid 90s would have to be Mr. Tony Cottee.
Yeah.
And I think that there would be very few people that would disagree with me on that. Obviously, it's a big shout to put his head on the side of Matty Rushmore. But I think he deserves it. Had he had maybe half a yard more pace, he would probably have been in England an England regular. I mean, his finishing was phenomenal. If he had sight of goal, then 99 times out of 100 it would end up in the back of the net.
Yeah, he was lethal, wasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, I've got his first division, 92 goals from 203 games, which is, it's just under one every other game, isn't it? Which you can't ask for any more from a striker. But it's, there's a lot of strikers that score a lot of goals. I mean, Frank McAvenny was in the running. He gets an honourable mention, but I don't think he was the natural goal scorer that Cottee was. No. Just think he was born with that, and the four players I've picked were all born with that natural talent for finding the back of the net from almost every angle, which meant that, from time to time they were often classified as greedy because they would often... Yeah, and I know, Tony Cottee had a lot of problems in his early career with being labelled as lazy, not by the fans so much, but by his teammates. Yeah. And I know that he got hooked on several occasions and told that he had to buck his ideas up in terms of his work rate and running back, tracking back, whatever. But his goal return speaks for itself. Absolutely. I think one of the key moments, I mean, you say there about his teammates getting the ump with him because he was possibly not so much a team player, if you will. I think was during the 85-86 season. The story that I've heard is that the players had a little bit of a meeting. I think I remember Tony Gale telling the story on Time of Our Lives on Sky Sports, and he said that basically Frank McAvenny was running around like a mad dervish, and Tony wasn't pulling his weight as far as that's concerned. And the story I've heard is that they all had a bit of a conflab and basically said, you got to sort of like put it in a little bit more. And of course, we know what happened the rest of that season. I think there was a spell early on in that season where he wasn't actually playing that well as well. And he was dropped for the away game at Southampton. And he came on as a sub and scored. And I think that must have been around the time where he'd had his teammates in his ear roll, because after that game, I don't think he looked back. What did he get? 26 that season or something? In the league, he got 20 goals in 42 appearances, and in total, he got 26 in 52 in all competitions. Well, you are. 26 in 52 is one every other game, isn't it? Yeah, phenomenal. I mean, just sort of like from a personal point of view, Tony Cottee was is my first footballing hero, my first West Ham hero, because in the very first game that I went with my dad to the Bowling Ground was the game against Bury in the League Cup. He got 4 goals that night and we won 10-0, and he's been my footballing hero. He was my first footballing hero. I've had others that have obviously come along, like Julian Dix and various others that I sort of like place on a bit of a pedestal, but Tony was the first. Yeah, I think that Bury game was probably 3rd or 4th game that I'd been to, and you're probably like me, it sort of lulled you into a false sense of security. Yeah, it did a bit. Yeah, but it's also interesting because I mean, you're probably more or less the same age as me, and which makes us more or less the same age as Tony Cottee, and I think he's a couple of years older than me. But when you're watching players on the football pitch, it's different now because they're all so much younger. I don't really hero worship so much as because they're just, you just can't connect with them. They're just so young and they're so well paid now. It's just they're not even, you just can't relate to them, modern players. But back then, he was only 2 years older than me, and he had, he was playing for West Ham, scoring all these goals. What something to sort of aspire to, and someone to hold in high esteem. So, and I was lucky enough to get to know him a little bit during his second spell when he came back, and he had his autobiography published by the same publishers that published my first book, and we had our launch together at in the Greenwood Suite at Upton Park.
Mm-hmm.
So I was lucky enough to get, from that, we were sort of good friends for a couple of years until he went off to Malaysia, and then we sort of lost touch. But and he was always happy to, I could phone him up and say, can I get a shirt signed or whatever, and he'd say, yeah, come down the training ground and we'll sort it out. So that was back in the days when, of course, you could go to Chadwell Heath and just hang around and watch the guys train. Even in training then, I remember going to watch him train, and he was the only one that was regularly putting the ball in the net during training. You'd see the others all blasting it high, wide and handsome, but he was the one that was always... I think he was such a perfectionist as well that, he took it personally if he wasn't scoring even in training. So
yeah,
that's he's top of my list.
Well, I commend you. As I say, he's my first footballing hero. So Tony Cottee, bang! He's the first one that with your cocktail stick, you've carved out the head of Mr. Tony Cottee into the side of your mountain. But you might need to get another cocktail stick, Robert, because you got 3 left.
Might need to use a chopstick for this one.
I think he's used the chopstick a few times.
I assume we're talking about John Hartson.
We may well be.
Yes. Yeah. He's another one that some might say he's more of a battering ram than a natural goal scorer. But I thought during that 97-98 season, he obviously showed us what he could do at the back end of the previous season when he first joined. But what a talent that guy was, and what a shame it was that it sort of fell away as quickly as it did.
Yeah.
But during that one campaign, that beautiful 97-98 season, where I think we only lost twice at home all season, didn't we? And
yeah,
away we were shocking, but
yeah,
but at home, it was just you went to every game thinking, we'll win this, no problem. And what a strange feeling that is. Equaled only in that respect by maybe season before last and this season in terms of expectations at home. But his ability to, he's one that everyone thought he's a battering ram, but his precision with his shooting as well was out of the top drawer. Really was. And like I say, it's just a shame that he couldn't, not one to speak, but he couldn't keep the weight off and keep himself really in tip-top condition.
Yeah.
And it all went to pot far too soon.
Yeah.
I don't know what your view on him was.
Well, he was only the second when sort of like they started the shirt, the name printing number on the back and all the rest of it. He was only the second that I actually ever got done. I had number 10 Hartson on the back of my 96-97 replica shirt. The first name and number I had on the back of a shirt was the guy that you've just mentioned. So, but yeah, he came in obviously in the 95-96 season with Paul Kitts and basically between the pair of them and everybody else sort of like pitched in. It wasn't just them, but their goals were obviously instrumental in us sort of like pulling away from the relegation zone. And then the following season, he started the season like an absolute steam train. It was ridiculous. The shame of it is, and you kind of alluded to it there, in that at the sort of like the latter end of the season, it did kind of peter out, and you were left sort of like thinking, what could have been if like you say, if he could have kept up that momentum that he had in the early part of the season, whether it was a fitness thing, whether it was just a lack of application, whatever the reason was, there was a definite downturn in his goals output. But just looking here, his output was still pretty respectable in the Premier League. He got 15 goals in 32 appearances in all competitions, 24 in 42. And that, interestingly enough, in terms of his career in the Premier League, was actually his best season in terms of goal output. He did score more goals in later seasons, but they were in the Scottish Premier League for Celtic. He never replicated that goal form again in the Premier League.
Yeah, I think also what he represents in terms of the club, because up to that point, when we arrived in the Premier League, I think we'd been pretty much surviving hand to mouth and buying the odd player here and there, but we were clearly in desperate straits and looking like going down at the midpoint of that 95, 96?
Yeah.
96, 97.
Was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, 96,
yes,
97.
96,
Yes, that was his
97.
debut season, yes.
And then suddenly the board came up with, was it 5.5 million? Was it 5.5 million for him and Kitson, or 5.5 million for him and Kitson on top, 2.3 for Kitson or something?
He was purchased... hang on, it says Hearts and linked up West Ham, 3.2 million at the time. He was the most expensive player to be signed by West Ham. The deal was initially reported to be worth 5 million though. Right.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's all going to be a bit vague, isn't it? But whatever the figures were, it represented a shift in attitude from the board towards West Ham's survival in the Premier League, I think.
That was a lot of money back then, wasn't it?
I mean, well, I think the most we'd spent on a player up to that point had been 1.5, maybe.
Sounds about right.
And that would be one player. Then Hartson and Kitson came along, and then I think Steve Lomas came shortly afterwards.
Yep.
There may even have been another signing that season. Can't quite recall. But then Berkovic came in the summer, didn't he? And yeah, all right. We'll keep him away from the mountain, just in case he sprays it with graffiti or something.
I thought they were good friends, though, Rob.
Well, I think I've seen and heard things that they've made it up since, but you wonder how much of this is, you don't kick someone in the head in training unless you hate their guts, really, do you?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what they've done to you. Don't know. Anyway, very strange.
It's quite strange also that I don't think that after that Harry was so keen on having supporters coming along to Chadwell Heath for some strange reason.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that was a shame. When I wrote for the fanzine, we used to go there, obviously to interview players primarily, but we'd also go along and interview Harry once a year, and he'd sit down with us for 2 or 3 hours sometimes and have a whole issue just dedicated to that interview, and he was quite open, and I think that whole ethos is long gone now. When you think you can't even get near the training ground, let alone sit down with the manager for 2 or 3 hours and have an interview.
It's a shame, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean,
you can kind of understand it because obviously we live in a world of social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, TikTok. Everyone's got a camera phone. Do you know what I mean? So I can understand that they might be a little bit more guarded and a little bit less free with their words and with their time than maybe sort of 20, 30 years ago for that very reason. But even so, I do think that it is a great pity that sort of access has been denied by the common or garden supporter.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt that that freedom of access got abused from time to time, unfortunately, but it was going to happen anyway. It was going to be taken away anyway, because, as you say, the saturation of coverage on Sky Sports and the amount of football there is on TV now. When you think that, when I started following football in the mid-70s, the only club game that was on TV during the season was the FA Cup final.
Yeah.
No league matches. There was match of the day. There was a big match. There's no live league football. FA Cup final, even the League Cup final wasn't live. That was on a Saturday afternoon at 3:00, along with all the other league matches, and you might get highlights on a Sunday afternoon. England matches were live, weren't they? And the World Cup, European Championships. So that was it. But now you've got third division games. You've got National League games live. Yeah. I mean, it's getting to the point where it's just, watching football on TV isn't as exciting as it used to be, simply because there's so much of it. It's different when it's your team, but to just see, you just switch on the TV now and there's a game on. So who's this?
Kind of loses its mystique, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's like everything else. If you've got an endless supply of it, it becomes a bit boring.
Yeah. Absolutely. Right. So John Hartson has joined Tony Cottee on the side of your mountain. Mr. Banks, how's your chopstick looking?
Yeah, it's worn down a little bit, I have to say. It's because there was quite a bit of sculpting going on there. May have to do
I can't tempt you with a hammer and chisel?
Yeah, I think a lot of people might like to use a hammer and chisel for my next choice, which
this one could be controversial.
Could be controversial. Be interested to see the comments on this, but I've gone for Jermaine Defoe.
Sharp intake of breath from the viewer.
Sorry, avid viewer.
I'm sure there's at least two of them.
Avid viewers. I mean, love him or hate him, and I know a lot of people hate him. What a talent that guy was. I mean, I first saw him playing for West Ham when I think West Ham were away at Man United. It was the day we got thrashed 7-1 up at Old Trafford. I think One Chop got an early goal, and that upset them. And they absolutely wiped the floor with us.
Was Craig Forrest in goal? Or am I misremembering?
Yeah, I think he was because they were saying it could be another 9. Like he conceded 9 when he was in goal for Ipswich, didn't he? Up there. And
sorry, Craig.
Yeah, I liked Craig Forrest. Thought he was a great keeper. Yes, at Upton Park that afternoon they had a youth team match, which was, funnily enough, West Ham against Manchester United. I think it was an FA Youth Cup tie. And then they were showing the game on the big screens.
I remember they used to do that, the beanbag.
Yeah. So I went along to watch the youth team game, and that was the first time I'd seen Jermaine Defoe play in the flesh. Heard a lot about him, and he got a hat trick. West Ham youth team beat Manchester United youth 5-0, and I thought, "Ooh, we've got something here." And then I saw him make his debut for the first team at Walsall. And he scored. And I think in that first season, the first full season would have been first season under Roeder, I think. Possibly.
Just looking here, his stats. Yeah, his first full season was 2001, 2002. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he like Tony Cottee, he was someone who could find the net from almost any angle and from it felt like almost any distance as well. He wasn't necessarily a six-yard player. He could strike the ball with pace and venom from 18 yards as easily as he could from 6. And his positioning, his intelligence around the box was something that he developed, and obviously as he went to Spurs and he went to Portsmouth and a couple of other clubs as well, he had that unhappy knack of managing to score against us as well on a number of occasions. But I know that he's unpopular, and I know the reasons why he's unpopular. But unlike a certain Mr. Ince, who a lot of people put him in the same category, he has sort of apologised since then and shown some sort of contrition. And I think the other thing to bear in mind with Defoe is, on a personal level, you see the way he interacted with young Bradley
Yes.
Lowry.
Yes.
You can't fail to be moved by what you saw there, and you can't be all bad, but purely on a football level, in the early 2000s, I don't think there was anyone that could touch him in terms of ability. And as I say, if this category that I've picked is natural goal scorers, you'd have to say he was probably a bit quicker than Tony Cottee, and if he stayed at West Ham, he may well have got more goals than Cottee did.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite likely. I mean, just looking here at his stats, he got 29 Premier League goals in 93 appearances, 41 in 105 in all competitions for the club. Looking at his career statistics, though, I mean, look at this. 305 goals in all competitions in 763 career matches. And that's not including England, so you can sort of add another. Let's just have a look. How many England goals did he get? He got 20 goals in 57 appearances. And I don't think he ever really, as for England's concerned, 57 caps. I mean, I'm actually kind of surprised he got as many as that, because it never ever felt like he was
he's never a regular choice
starter, was he? No.
I mean, he was around at the same time as Rooney, I guess, and he was always. He never played for Manchester United or Liverpool. Just racking my brains there to make sure I don't make a mistake there. But I think had he gone to one of the bigger clubs, he may well have got more England caps and got more goals. He did score. I think he scored in the 2010 World Cup, didn't he? Against.
Hang on. Yes, he did. He scored against Slovenia.
I was just going to say that. And at international level, I remember, I think he might have even got a hat-trick or something as well. But those stats, even in the modern era where people are talking about Harry Kane getting, breaking the record for number of goals, when you get a cap, with England play so many games now. Again, we were talking earlier about number of games that are on TV. I mean, England never used. They used to play 3 games in the home internationals.
Yep.
And they were sort of spread out through the year, weren't they, or through the early part of the year. And World Cup qualifiers would be dotted here and there, and there was no international break. They just squeezed them in as and when. And if your player was selected to play for England, you had to play your league match without him. Simple as that.
Yeah. Bit of a change now in the Premier League era.
Anyway, yeah. Let's not get onto that.
Yeah.
Anyway, where was I? Yeah, I think in terms of natural goal scoring talent, those statistics probably suggest that out of all my nominations, his is probably the strongest case for that title of natural goal scorer.
Yeah, I think that it is a great shame that he's so badly thought of by the West Ham fans at large. And I'll be honest, I was one of them initially. But like you say, he has, in fairness to him, come out and shown a little bit of humility, and he's put his hands up and gone, look, I was 19, 20 years of age. I was being advised by an agent.
Yeah.
And I got it wrong. I shouldn't have done what I did. I shouldn't have done it the way I did it. What's done is done. And you, like you say, I think it goes a long way for someone that when the realization that I've dropped a bit of a clanger here, that you put your hands up and go, hey, it's a fair cop sort of thing. And like you say as well with the Bradley Lowry thing, I mean, you know, a lot of footballers wouldn't have necessarily gone to the lengths that he did. I mean, he actually he went out of his way to make himself a sort of like a positive figure in that young lad's life. So yeah, I mean that for me also went a long way for me personally, softening my stance towards him. Don't get me wrong, you know, when he came back with Sunderland and whatever, I would still give him a sort of like a hearty boo, but it was more like a pantomime villain type booing rather than sort of like I was actually, you know, throwing any sort of hatred or anything like that towards him. It was just sort of like a bit just sort of done sort of like for the sort of pantomime value of it. But
I think the other thing is, whilst we all remember the transfer request within 24 hours of being relegated, which I think most people think was the reason that he was so disliked, but during that first half of the championship campaign, whilst he was being played regularly, and I think I've got his figures here, 11 goals from 19 games in the league. Not a bad return.
No.
That's from someone who didn't want to play.
But he also got 3 reds as well, didn't he?
That was the thing, wasn't it? And the suspicion was that he was getting sent off deliberately so that he could either he didn't have to play and could engineer a move towards in the January window, or just to show that he wasn't very very happy about being forced to stay at the club, which is again pretty petulant and immature way of handling yourself, and one can only think that it was at someone else's suggestion because I can't imagine that any professional footballer would deliberately get themselves sent off. Because at the end of the day, all professional footballers love playing football, and you know, if he got 11 goals in 19 league matches, and I know he got a few in the cups as well that season, because I think he got something like 15 in 22 or something in all competitions in that season, just in half a season, 15.
He got 15 in 22.
That's not somebody who doesn't want to play. If he was really determined not to play, he'd have been blasting them over the bar or deliberately missing as well.
I've got my hamstrings feeling a little bit tight, boss. You know, so yeah. I mean, he didn't down tools in that respect. I mean, the 3 red cards. Was it that he was not in a good place in terms of his mental state, in his emotional state, that maybe he did want to get out of there, and not saying he was intentionally getting himself sent off, but maybe he was just not possibly thinking situations through as he otherwise might not have been as clear-headed. It might not have been a conscious thought for him, I'll get sent off or anything, but maybe he was just sort of jumping into situations without thinking of the consequences of his actions first, you know, and he was a kid as well, still, like fundamentally he was 21, whatever it was at the time. I just double checked as well for you, Rob, because you mentioned about you thought that he'd got a hat-trick for England. He did indeed. 3rd of September 2010 at Wembley, he got 3 goals against Bulgaria in a 4-0 win in a Euro 2012 qualification match.
There you go.
There you go.
And what I compared him earlier to Paul Ince. You could put the Paul Ince situation with the Manchester United shirt down to poor advice as well. And I know that it was done with the best of intentions. The Man United deal had been sorted, it had been signed, but they weren't going to announce it until after his agent got back from holiday. The photo got leaked, blah, 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 blah. But Ince never showed any contrition. He never, ever apologised for that. And I think that's one of the reasons why, I still haven't got any time for him. I think if he'd held his hands up like Defoe did and said, yeah, that was pretty stupid. But he was the governor, wasn't he?
I've heard other people. I heard an interview that Ambrose Mendy, Paul Ince's agent at the time, gave, where he gave his side of the story and sort of like said, yeah, it was a bit of a dumb move, blah blah blah. But like you say, I've never heard it come from Paul Ince himself. I've never seen Paul Ince sat in front of a camera and the words of "I dropped a bit of a bollock" come out of his mouth, sort of thing.
I mean, technically, he didn't do anything wrong. He was just having his photograph taken. The deal had been done, and it wasn't going to be published until afterwards. But it got leaked, and everyone assumed that he was trying to force a move by posing in the shirt, but all he had to do was say, look, it was all a big mistake. But I think he's just one of these characters that, well, I've not done anything wrong, so why should I say I'm sorry? But it's just followed him round throughout his career. And, whereas he could have had a reasonable relationship with the West Ham fans, going forward, but he chose to take this other path.
I don't think I'm going to see Paul Ince on any of the old player events on the circuit or anything like that anytime soon.
Well, I think you're probably surprised to see Jermaine Defoe's face on the side of Mount Rushmore, but you'd be even more surprised if anyone picked Paul Ince, probably.
Well, you never know, Rob. I might just get surprised. There might be someone that throws that curveball. As I say, they might concentrate on the bad boys genre. So
say if the character, if the category is arrogant bastards, then
he'd be all four of them. There. Bang, 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 bang. There you go. Right, so Jermaine Defoe joins Tony Cottee and John Hartson. One more left, Mr. Banks. Where are we going?
Well, in a similar vein to John Hartson, it's one of those what a shame categories, and it's Dean Ashton. In terms of as an all-round striker, I don't think I've ever seen anyone better. He had strength, power, pace, great header of the ball, great shot with either foot. I don't think I'd be exaggerating to say he was probably the best all-round striker we had since Jeff Hurst. I don't think that would be an exaggeration. Praise, but... and that's why it's such a crying shame that his career was ended as early as it was. I mean, when he first arrived in 05-06, that second half of the season, he was just unplayable. And remember his goal it was at the Etihad. I don't think they'd moved from Main Road. They'd moved from Main Road already, and they Manchester City
in the FA Cup.
In the FA Cup quarter-final, where he sort of beat two players and then hit it with his left into the far corner. And I just thought, we're going to win the FA Cup. We're going to win the FA Cup with this guy because, and I think I know he scored at least one in the final. I think the other one's credited as an own goal, isn't it? But
I think it was Carragher. I think.
Oh, what a shame!
Not such a nice guy.
And then I think it was during that summer, wasn't it? He picked up his first injury, and God, imagine him playing in that next season with Carlos Tevez.
Oh, ridiculous!
We never got to see it.
I don't think we've been struggling against relegation.
No. And then when he came back, he obviously, by the time he came back, I think he was already only 75% of the player he was the first season. But still, what a guy. I think as I say, in terms of he was a natural goal scorer in that, again, like the others that I've mentioned in this category, he could find the net from anywhere. But to me, he had the full package. He had, I go over it again, he had the pace, he had the power, he had the heading ability, he had the shooting ability, and he linked up play so well as well. He could, he was not a bad passer of the ball. He had acrobatics. Remember that goal he scored at Old Trafford. Yeah. That they recreated in Mark Noble's testimonial. And you know, I mean, God, if that guy had stayed fit, you know,
it's one of those what ifs, isn't it?
Yeah, but for that period from January 2006 through to the cup final, I honestly thought, you know, we've got something really special here, and obviously it took several years for the realization, because you always had that hope that he was going to come back and he'd be the same player. But you know, for that brief period, really thought we had the real deal. He was the real deal, but unfortunately we didn't have him for long enough.
And I funnily enough, Gio from Hammer's Chat was on. He did a recording of this last week with me, and one of his names was Dean Ashton, and I said to him that if you could have had a hybrid striker with the shooting, with the power, with the goal scoring ability of Alan Shearer, but meshed that with a player with the footballing intelligence of Teddy Sheringham, you get Dean Ashton.
Yeah, that's good. That's a very good way of putting it. Like I say, he used to link up the play very well, and when he dropped deep, he would bring other players into the play to create chances for him further on in the move. You know, I could watch the highlights video of that second half of that season again and again. Mind you, the first half was pretty good that season as well. But when he came along and you had him, Zamora, Harewood, Sheringham all vying for striking positions up front, that was quite a team.
Yeah, not a bad striking options to choose from. 4 strikers. That's we're not going to see 4 goal scorers in the squad anytime soon. I mean, I'm not even too sure we've probably got more than one, but there you go. That's another story. But
you might have one if you add 2 together. But I'm not so sure which 2 they are.
It again is something I said to Gio, and I don't want to use the word tragedy and for people to misinterpret what I'm saying. In that I'm not saying it's a tragedy as in sort of like the real world. Obviously it was a tragedy for Dean Ashton himself, but I'm talking, you know, tragedy. It wasn't an earthquake, it wasn't a plane crash, it wasn't anything like that, but for me that was a footballing tragedy, because you just sit there and go, what could his career have entailed? Now I think it's quite likely that had that injury not happened and his career had panned out the way that I think most people think it would have done, he probably wouldn't have been at West Ham for too much longer than possibly another season. He possibly would have had the next season, like you say, he might have linked up with Carlos Tevez. Then again, it's possible that maybe the Tevez deal wouldn't have happened because Dean Ashton would have been available to the club. So it's one of those. Would the Tevez deal have happened if Dean Ashton had been fit? Maybe not. We'll never know.
I think the Tevez deal was always going to happen because of Jarabchian's intentions in trying to take the club over. But yes, I guess it may not have been as pressing to get another striker into the club in that respect. And obviously we have to bear in mind that Tevez didn't hit his stride until sort of February, March time late, of that season. But if he'd been playing alongside someone like Dean Ashton, you have to think that he would have had a lot more to feed off than he had in the in that first half of the season, playing alongside the likes of Harewood or Zamora, who had both gone off the boil by that stage.
Yeah,
and that's a mystery, isn't it? How a team could go from playing so well that previous season to well, we see it every
crazy.
time.
It's typical West Ham, isn't it? But just looking here at his stats, the season he came back from the injury, 07-08, and as you said, he wasn't the Dean Ashton post-injury that he was pre. He was probably 70-75% of the player. Even so, 10 goals in 31 Premier League appearances, 11 goals in 35 in all competitions. I just look at that and go, what could a fully fit Dean Ashton have done? If he was sort of firing on all cylinders, if he didn't have the ankle that was sort of held together by bits of super glue and whatever. It was such a shame. And I mean, it took just about 3 and a bit years between him sustaining the injury in 06 and the announcement in December 2009 that he was being forced to retire. I imagine he must have gone through all sorts of operations, all sorts of rehab programs. The guy must have been through a personal torture just to try and get himself semi-competitive to play Premier League football. And in the end, after all that effort, he's eventually had to admit defeat. And I think he was 26, something like that, when he retired. And you just go, he had possibly another 8 to 10 years ahead of him playing top level football. The only thing I would say that I think I heard an interview with him where he said one thing he was at peace with is the fact that he did manage to get an England cap under his belt. Yes, it was only a 45-minute appearance against Trinidad and Tobago, but he got an England cap, which is more than some players have managed. I mean, you look at Billy Bonds, for example, never won an England cap yet he got 799 West Ham appearances. Dean Ashton played significantly less for West Ham, but managed to get 45 minutes in an England shirt. So,
well, you could argue that England cap ultimately cost him his career, didn't it? I mean, in that he picked up the injury in training whilst on England duty.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. So,
costly.
But Dean Ashton is the fourth name that you have selected, the fourth face that you have carved out with first a chopstick, or no, it was a cocktail stick, then a chopstick, and then I think you've eventually sort of admitted that, maybe you need a hammer and chisel. So I'm going to show, ladies and gentlemen, that is Mr. Banks's Mount Matty Rushmore. I got to say, your stonemasonry ain't too bad, Mr. Banks.
I'm quite pleased with that.
That's very accomplished.
You can see how using the cocktail stick got the detail a bit better, can't you? But
I've got to say, Tony Cottee, I've got to say, I think you've managed to get the sort of like the sweep of his hair. Very, very detailed. It has to be said. No, that's a good little Mount Rushmore you've got there, mate, and I commend you on your diligent hard work. Well earned rest and a beer now, I think, after all that work. Sounds good to me, mate. Sounds good to me. Well, I'd like to thank you very much indeed for your time in this particular venture, Mount Matty Rushmore. And for those of you watching at home, I'd like to thank you very much indeed for your time watching this particular broadcast. Please don't forget to like, comment on and share the stream to your social media platforms. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and don't forget to hit that bell icon for alerts and new content. As always, I'd like to thank you very much indeed for your support. And Mr. Banks, I've got one question for you, my friend. What are we?
What are we?
We are...
Oh, we're massive, but not as massive as we used to be.
Well, we're getting there. Fingers crossed. Come on, you Irons.
Hello, Waterstones. I'd like to buy a copy of An Irrational Hatred of Everything by Robert Banks.